into, is that 160 Republicans, which is quite shocking. And from Amnesty's point of view, we have a lot of concerns with that trial and the fact that his trial has been neither fair nor transparent. His trial has been held entirely behind closed doors, entirely in secret, and not long after he was arrested, it was announced that his trial would be held behind closed doors. We put out a statement saying that, this kind of trial, a secret trial, is the most flagrant violation of the right to a fair, transparent trial. And sadly, nearly 6 years later, that remains the case. He still has hearings. We know the trial has reached the concluding phase, so we know we're closer to a verdict than any time during that 6 years, and that's why it's so important to be here today. And there are 12 of these vigils happening around the country in all different places, and there are hundreds of Australians and people standing out in support of Mohammed and his family, and it's so important because with this trial, what we said when we released that statement, and again what remains the case, is that these kind of trials don't lead to justice. And Amnesty's belief is that trials where it's secret, we don't know this because the trial is secret, but we do believe that the prosecution is relying on evidence obtained, either a confession obtained under duress, and Mohammed was detained for a really long time without a lawyer, or on evidence from informers in prison. And again, relying on that evidence will render a conviction guilty verdict unsound. And that's why it's really important that we stand up today and say that, he needs to have a fair trial, he needs to have a transparent trial, and no one should face 20 years in prison after a trial held behind closed doors. The Australian government conducted an audit not long after he was arrested, and that audit found there was no evidence to support the allegations against him. World Vision has also conducted an audit, both by big accounting firms, and none of them have found evidence to support the allegations, to support the charges. It's really important that we pressure the Israeli government, but I think by being here we're also pressuring the Australian government to raise concerns with his trial, with the Israeli government, to raise the findings of their audit. And we've had a number of meetings with people like the Reverend Tim Costello, with DFAT, with a number of MPs, and a number of MPs have spoken out in Parliament calling for justice for Mohammed, and so it's so good to be here today and to be adding to that pressure, because it really can make a difference. And when you talk to Tim Costello, he kind of says, if Mohammed had pleaded guilty by now, he would have been free. But he's chosen to plead not guilty because he doesn't want to be tarnished with that. And that's a really brave thing to do. It's so important to be here with him and his family. And his father's put out a letter to his son, because obviously today is his birthday, that's why we're here. And I do recommend you go read that letter. It's really wonderful letter. As we've mentioned already, Amnesty has in the last few months put out our report on where we analysed Israel's laws, policies and practices, and concluded that these laws, policies and practices do constitute apartheid, and the justice system was a big part of that analysis. I was quite shocked when I read it. There have been 800,000 Palestinians arrested in the occupied Palestinian territories since 1967. And one of the findings was that systematically those Palestinians face unfair trials. And I think this case is very public. Obviously, it involves Australia and World Vision and a lot of things that raise awareness. And that's why it's so important, I think, also to look at this case, because this is one public case, but there are so many others who face the same trial. And the last thing I wanted to say in terms of the repercussions of this trial, and again why it's so important, and thank you all for being here, is 80% of people in Gaza are reliant on humanitarian assistance from Quad Vision because of the blockade that Israel has on Gaza, which from Amnesty's point of view is collective punishment and it's illegal. But this, after Mohammed was arrested, a number of countries pulled funding from World Vision, and that is really concerning if he is found guilty, that they will pull funding again. We've seen something similar in the last few months where a number of civil society organisations were marked as terrorist organisations, and again they had funding from particularly the European Union, and now that funding is being called into question because they are now officially terrorist organisations, even though there's been no evidence to support that. And I think it's really important for literally for 80% of people in Gaza that he has a fair trial and that they continue, like organisations like World Vision can continue to provide that humanitarian assistance. So that's all. It's not a lot of good news, sorry, but thank you for being here because like I said, it does make a difference. And again, when I have met with DEFA and with Tim Costello, he kind of always says that if there wasn't this pressure on, he would have been found guilty by now. But because of this pressure that's coming from MPs, from people like you, unfortunately he's still detained, and that's horrific. But it also means they aren't willing to sentence him to decades in prison, and we need to keep that pressure on as the verdict gets closer, and we'll keep doing that at Amnesty. We'll keep standing in solidarity with Palestinians and working for Palestinian human rights, and I'm sure we'll see you all along that journey, so thank you again.